Hey everyone, welcome back to another art lesson. Today we are doing something called Beyond the Border, where our subject matter seems like it is coming out from this border, creating a 3D effect. In this work, you're going to be learning how to do inking as well as watercolor techniques. So let's prepare your border first. Let's measure a 6x6 cm border around your A3 art paper. Then you're going to choose a subject matter from one of these groups. Be specific when you're choosing your subject matter. For example, birds, you can choose many kind of birds, peacock, hummingbird. So be specific about your subject matter, and then you can go online to gather your sources. I recommend that you get a few pictures of the same subject matter just so you have a few angles to look at. So our first step to starting our task is to do composition sketches where you try out different layouts. This is where you're going to use your reference photo and plan out how you want your composition to be. The requirement is that the subject must intersect or come out from the border. I want you to make at least 3 thumbnail sketches. Here I'm demonstrating how I use the rule of third and placing the subject matter on the cross. And I'm also using leading lines to sort of guide people's eyes across. And I'm also trying out the principles of design that we have learned before to place my decorative items. You can also see I'm decorating the border with things that are related to my subject matter. For example, my fish, I know it's underwater, so I am placing like corals and seaweeds. After that, you can finalize your composition and transfer the design onto an art block paper. You can see here my lines are very rough when I first transferred it. It's because I want to get my position right first before I add on the details, because I don't want to waste too much time erasing the details again and again if my position is wrong. When you're drawing, you always want to use reference photos. Here I have gathered some coral pictures as reference so that I know how to create these decorative elements around the border. After you're done with the drawing, it's time to start painting. We're going to start with painting the areas within the border first and also the subject matter. And the areas that are outside the border will be done using black and white inking. Let me just quickly demonstrate some of the watercolor techniques that we have learned before. We have wet on wet, where the colors spread easily. Then we have wet on dry. To blend the colors, just use a clean brush to blend it. You can also try the lifting off technique. This is very good if you want to erase any kind of mistakes or create textures. If you don't have watercolor paint, you can always substitute it using your poster color, but just make sure you use only a tiny bit. Here I am showing 3 different levels of opacity or thickness of the paint. You can see the first level, I use only a very tiny bit of the red pigment. That is why the red is very transparent. The second one, I put a bit more pigment so that the red is slightly darker. And the third one, I put a bit more pigment and thus the color is more opaque and more intense. Now that you have understand how watercolor works, we will start by painting the background first using the wet on wet technique. This is very easy for blending different colors together, especially analogous colors. So for my background, I am using blue and purples. First, I'll wet the area of the background first and then I will put the colors in. When I apply the colors, I basically just dip them in and let the water do the blending for me. I'm doing a bit of lifting off for the bubbles because I want the bubbles to be a lighter color. After you're done with the background, then you can work on your subject matter. I think my fish, the base color is yellow, so that's what I'm putting first using the wet on wet technique. After the first layer has dried, I'm gonna add on more layers of darker colors. I am going to add orange around the fish because in the reference photo, the areas at the edges are kind of darker. So I'll focus on the shadow areas and I'll use a clean brush to blend it. After that, I'll let it dry again and I'll add on more layers so that the shadows and the colors are getting darker and darker. The thing about watercolor is you want to avoid painting the light areas. So if you can notice it, my tummy, I have purposely left it white because that is the light area. So basically just continue layering on the colors, especially around the shadow areas. Once the layers of colors are done, then you can use detailing to add texture to your subject matter. Like what I'm doing here, I'm doing scaling and also adding the fin texture using a slightly darker orange. Just remember to work in layers and keep on layering and layering. I think for my fish, I have used at least 10 to 20 layers of colors. Okay, my subject matter is done. I am gonna work on the other decorative parts of the border. So for whatever things that appear within the border, it should be in color. So for my corals, I am painting just a base layer first. Then I will apply the same concept of layering to add texture and shadows. Again, always use your reference photo so that you know where to add shadows. And here I am adding texture to make my corals look a bit more realistic and interesting. Once you're done painting, we can move on to the inking step. Here I have my fine liner pen. If you don't have it, it's fine, you can use black pen. Here I'm demonstrating a few inking methods that you can use. When we want to ink, we always start with the most basic line. But you can make it verified by using hatching technique, or you could also do stippling, which is dotting, kind of like pointillism. You can also do a bit of shading using the hatching method. You can also thicken up the lines to add more variety, like how you see in comic books. So first thing, you want to outline all the drawings first before you proceed to add texture using the various methods that I have demonstrated just now. You can see here for my rocks, I'm using a hatching technique. I'm also adding lines on the corals. Then I'm using a scribbling circly motion for the corals here. And more hatching techniques. And I'm darkening the soil. And then I'm using stippling for the corals at the bottom. So complete the inking and your final outcome should look something like this. Thank you.